Hello and welcome. It is Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity. Following what was a crazy week in college football, we knew it was going to be a crazy week in college football, but we also knew that we had a potentially really fun game. And boy, you mentioned that Austin was going to be one of the loudest environments I'll ever go to. I think you were right. That place was insane.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, that everything that we hoped that game would be, and the atmosphere, it was all of that and more. I mean, the game delivered, the crowd delivered, the weather delivered. Everything was perfect about that matchup and the setting. And when a game goes down to the final play, to top all of that off, it just can't get any better than that. And I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and I can count on one hand the number of games that I've had like that, that have been that kind of game of that magnitude, that much energy. And that still ranks, has got to be one of the best I've ever done, because there were 7 lead changes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was incredible. I mean, and we had, rocket onside kicks, and we had interceptions that should have been called that weren't. And we had, missed extra points and all kind of stuff. So it was quite the deal.
Yeah, we had one of the leading receivers for Oregon sent away from the game because of flagrant behavior. That's all I'll say about what that behavior was. But as we said during the game, it had a little bit of everything, and anything you did expect maybe didn't happen, and what you didn't expect did. So that leads us right into this, and we'll go around the Big Ten, but we got to start with the game. So 2 versus 3, Ohio State, Oregon.
Yeah.
Both teams, I loved what you said during the game. You said both teams played well enough to win the game, which is what makes a great matchup like that, especially when it's top 3. So as you now have had a couple days to really reflect on what we saw in Eugene, what really stands out to you?
Yeah, well, I think that point about both teams playing well enough to win and making a good showing for themselves is why they're both still in the top 4.
Yeah.
That's why, because Ohio State played a heck of a game on the road in a hostile environment. Will Howard threw for over 300 yards. Their receiver stepped up, their running back stepped up. Their defense did not step up the way that I think people and Ohio State fans maybe thought that they would. But part of that is because this was the best offense by far that they've faced. Dylan Gabriel, I thought, was outstanding. He missed a couple passes where he just wasn't on the same page, one time with his tight end, one time with the back out of the backfield. But other than that, I mean, he was unbelievable, especially considering that he played half the game without one of his best receivers in Holden. Jordan James was the best looking running back on the field, and I'm sure he took – that very personal for him, to outplay the 2 guys that, coming in for Ohio State. Evan Stewart stepped up and was magnificent. And then the fact that the thing that stood out to me the most is Oregon had the miscues, right? The missed extra point, the missed field goal, the go for 2 and got stuffed on that, the interception that should have been that didn't go their way. And they played the game, half the game without Holden, and the whole game without their best defensive player in Jordan Burch. And yet they still won the game. So to me, that really spoke a lot about their depth of talent, their character, their mental toughness, their physical toughness. And I really think at the end of the day, and at the end of the game, the fact that Oregon had been in a game similar to that already this season at home against Boise State, where they were behind late and had to kick a field goal to win, and Ohio State had not been in a game like that. I think that had something to do with Oregon's poise and composure at the end of the game.
Before we move on to Illinois, I just want to bring up 2 other things that we could touch on here. One, Dan Lanning did confirm that the 12 men on the field was intentional in the final 10 seconds. It's something apparently that they've practiced in very specific situations. And the other thing is, I got a lot of texts after the game from Ohio State fans that were upset, and understandably so. You lose a game, you get upset. I get that. But the one thing I did say is Buckeyes are going to be just fine. I'm not concerned about that team, and I'm not concerned about where that season's going.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're a great football team, and they're going to be right there in the mix of things, and they'll have another great opportunity to prove themselves on the road at Penn State in a couple weeks. And if they win that game, I mean, they're going to be right where they want to be. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with the 12 guys on the field. I mean, I get that, and I saw where Dan said that. It's still a bit of a risk to me
Yeah.
because if it's not like they just put the guy on the field at the right before the ball was snapped. He wasn't necessarily part of the coverage. It wasn't like they had this 12-man defensive coverage to shut it down. It was an incomplete pass. If Ohio State completes a 20-yard in on that play, they're in position to kick the field goal anyway. So it worked out in this case, and the clock went from 10 seconds to 6. And so Ohio State only had 6 seconds for their last play. But, again, there's no one play that determines the outcome of a game. Again, Ohio State's defense, they didn't force a punt in the fourth quarter. They weren't able to stop Oregon late in the game when they needed a stop. And so you can't just pick one or two plays out and say, this is what decided the game. No game is decided like that.
No question. You mentioned Ohio State now 4 in the country. Oregon bumped up to number 2 in the nation. Move on. Illinois, and another ranked team in the Big Ten. It looked early against Purdue that they were going to steamroll them. They got out to that early lead, and credit to the Boilermakers for not only coming back, but really putting pressure on the Illini. They end up having to win this game with a combined 99 points in overtime, 50-49, and Illinois stays with just 1 loss on the year.
Yeah, and Purdue hadn't been able to score anything for a couple of weeks, right? Yeah. They fire their offensive coordinator. Their starting quarterback gets a concussion. I mean, how are they going to come up with 49 points? But they do. They were down 24-3 at half. They came storming back behind Ryan Brown, who had 279 yards passing and 3 touchdowns, also ran for over 100 yards. So a valiant effort by the Boilermakers. But, Illinois needed to win to stay on track, to stay on pace for what they want to do. Luke Altmaier played well again, 379 yards and 3 touchdowns. And so they're 5-1 now, and they host Michigan. And they're in a good position, a chance to become bowl eligible for the first, I think they've only done it a couple times here in the last 10 years. So it's a great opportunity. They've got a nice thing going. Their only loss was a game we did, and that was a close game in Happy Valley against Penn State in the whiteout energy game.
not a simple place.
Not the official whiteout, the whiteout energy game.
Yeah, that's correct. Whiteout with the ... Yes, that I would say similar to what we heard from both teams in Ohio State and Oregon coming into the game about how hard it is to win in college football. And you look around the country and you see all these teams that are faltering against what many people believe are inferior opponents. But I think Dylan Gabriel said it really well when we met with him. Everybody's got this vision of what it's supposed to look like. At the end of the day, the only stat that matters is whether or not you tally one in that W column.
That's right.
That's what Illinois did. And to your point, 5-1, here they are in really good position. So you could say the same thing about our next game breaking down here, and that's Penn State, your alma mater. Now number 4 coming into this week, and they have to rally. I mean, they're down 2 touchdowns early in this game in the first quarter, and send this to overtime with a couple 4th down conversions from Drew Aller to Julian Fleming, and eventually kick the game-winning field goal in OT in LA to beat USC. Just a really impressive come-from-behind win on the road.
Really was, and a couple of things that really stood out to me about that. Number one, Drew Aller. Not the fact that he threw for 391 yards, which is impressive, right? That's more than I ever threw in a game. But the fact that he was able to overcome some tough stuff, some personal adversity. He threw 3 interceptions, 2 touchdowns, but 3 interceptions. And he didn't let that. I mean, he just kept slinging it, And at the end of the game, when they needed him to step up and make plays, he delivered, So I was very impressed with him. And then, I mean, what more can Tyler Warren do, for an encore? I mean, and where would Penn State be this year without the guy? I mean, he is, when we were there, James Franklin was saying, this is the best tight end in college football. He should be the Mackey winner. And, I'm like, okay, he's pumping up his guy, and then he played really well in our game. But this is insane, 17 catches, over 240 yards and a touchdown. And just Andy Kotelnicki has done so much creatively with him to involve him in so many different ways in the offense. And he's just a fun guy to watch. He had to have been the most exhausted player on that flight home for how much he put into that game out there in the Coliseum. But that was a great win for them, and they moved up a notch, so they're kind of sitting there right between Oregon and Ohio State at number 3, and deservedly so. Now they get a week off before they'll get another good test when they go on the road to play at Wisconsin.
Todd, have you ever seen anybody snap the football, run down the field, and catch the touchdown?
Yeah, in my backyard, like playing pickup football. That's where I've seen it,
Right.
That's it. I've never seen it anywhere else. But yeah, that happened in a major college football game.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Andy Kotelnicki, we tip our collective caps to you as we move on to some of the other impact wins across the Big Ten. Northwestern now 3-3.
Yeah.
A good win for Ryan Braun and company as they beat Maryland. Maryland's kind of struggling. They're starting to reel a little bit here. 37-10, though, in favor of Northwestern in this one.
Yeah, and it's, turnovers are the difference in so many games. Definitely the difference in this one. 4 takeaways by the Northwestern defense, 3 fumble recoveries. One of them was returned for a touchdown. So a really good win for Northwestern at home, and Maryland, has not won a game in Big Ten play yet. They're a talented team. They've got a lot of really good players, but they just are missing something. And that's a tough loss. That's a tough loss for Mike Loxley.
No doubt about it. Iowa puts up 40 over Washington, coming off the win over Michigan. 40-16 win for the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, and Caleb Johnson kind of got right back on track. He got derailed a little bit in Columbus against Ohio State, and the Buckeyes' run defense was held under 100 yards. Back on at 166 yards, 2 touchdowns, also caught a touchdown pass. Kate McNamara didn't throw a lot, only 108 yards of passing, but 2 touchdowns, and their defense did what they do. They make it very difficult to do anything. They had 2 takeaways, and really Washington had 16 points, but that last touchdown was an oh by the way at the end against backups. I mean, it was a clear dismantling by the Iowa football team, and a great bounce back win for Kirk Ferentz's team after a disappointing loss in Columbus.
Yeah, Jed Fish mentioned the travel schedule as being difficult, and we've seen that in terms of the results across the conference and across the country for that matter. Wisconsin goes to Piscataway, though, and dismantles Rutgers. So now a couple losses for the Scarlet Knights, and Braden Locke's Wisconsin Badgers have it rolling a little bit here.
Yeah, Braden Locke and this new running back, Tawee Walker, who, has had to step up and has had over 100 yards the last 2 games in these 2 big wins. They've outscored Purdue and Rutgers, 94-13 the last 2 weeks. So an offensive explosion, defensive shutdown. Walker has been great, 198 yards and 3 touchdowns against Rutgers. And that's a good defense. That's typically a good run defense that Greg Schiano's got up there. And Wisconsin ran for over 300 yards. So they've got it rolling a little bit here. They go on the road, kind of a tricky game, going to play Northwestern this week. And if they win that, again, they're sitting at a pretty nice spot with Penn State coming in. And I would imagine even though Penn State's off, they're still going to be number 3 when those 2 teams play. So, but an important game up ahead for Wisconsin. But good to see Braden Locke doing as well as he is.
And that would be a massive environment at Camp Randall and another test for Penn State, as mentioned. Look at some of the game previews for Week 8 here, and let's start with ours, which is Iowa and Michigan State in East Lansing. You mentioned Iowa with some momentum now, 40 points last week. One thing for the offense to look the way they did, but they really did in all 3 facets of the game. You expect the defense, but got some great returns, special teams. Reese Dakin is starting to kick the ball, punt the ball a little bit better, and starting to find ways to play a little bit more like they saw with Torrey Taylor in the punting is winning era. So Iowa at Michigan State now coming off a little rest themselves.
Yeah, probably a much needed bye week for Michigan State to try to heal up, rest up, and make some corrections. And the biggest correction for them is they got to take care of the ball better. And you cannot hope to be in a game with Iowa if you're careless with the football. The last time, Michigan State played at Oregon, they only had 59 yards rushing. They had a turnover the week before that. They had 3 turnovers in the red zone against Ohio State in the first half. They moved the ball well. They actually moved the ball much better against Ohio State than they did against Oregon, but they turned it over 3 times in the red zone the first half. So a lot of turnovers. Aiden Childs, the quarterback, is super talented, but in a game like this against Iowa and the way Iowa plays, you have got to take care of the football. So that's task number one for Michigan State at home in their game against Iowa, is to take care of the football and make Iowa earn it and beat them rather than you beating yourself.
To be fair, I would have said, hey, it was Ohio State and Oregon, but Iowa's defense, as we know, is suffocating, and Phil Parker has them coached as well as any team in the conference and maybe even the country. Another undefeated team. This is a great matchup. It's going to be on Fox at noon. Undefeated number 16 Indiana against one-loss Nebraska. And we've seen Nebraska. I mean, they were ranked earlier in the year. They probably are right off of that ranking right now. They're receiving votes. They're in the discussion. So this is just about as good as a ranked matchup is. Indiana has already sold this game out. Kurt Cignetti has convinced his fans and his students and everybody to come out support, and they've got it really rolling is almost an understatement. They have it full steam ahead, one-way traffic at the moment, 6-0.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's great. I mean, they're definitely one of the big stories, not just in the Big Ten, but in college football. I know we're probably not supposed to promote any other network on this podcast, but I think it's awesome that Big Noon Kickoff's going to be there in the pregame and all that, because they deserve it. I mean, Indiana has played great football, and so they deserve to be on that kind of a stage. But this will be their toughest test, right? I mean, Nebraska is legit, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, they're the 7th best team in college football in terms of not giving up points, 11.3 points per game, going against the number 2 scoring offense in college football in Indiana at 47.5. So it's going to be an interesting matchup, a fun matchup, strength versus strength. And usually when that happens, it's kind of what happens with the other side, like Indiana's defense against Nebraska's offense. Who wins that part of the battle because you've got such strong units going at it on the other side. But it should be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch in general, as will the actual ranked matchup, number 24 versus number 22 in this conference, 3:30 on CBS. Michigan at Illinois. So we mentioned Illinois gets the kind of not convincing win. Michigan came off of a tough win, finds the loss, now the bye week, and here they are, still in the top 25, but looking to avoid their 3rd loss of the year.
Yeah, and I think the difference that we'll see out of Michigan, again, particularly with the extra time, I think it'll be Jack Tuttle is now their quarterback. I think we'll see more balance out of the Michigan offense than we've seen at any point so far this season, and that's what's held them back. And we've said this all along, and they knew that. What they were trying to do and how they were trying to win was not sustainable against good teams. And so maybe now if they have better offensive balance, that puts them in a position where they make a defense play a lot more honest. So that'll be a good game. Illinois is playing good football. They're confident. I'm sure they'll be jacked up there in Champaign to host a big game. And again, they've got a chance to become bowl eligible for just the 3rd time in the last 10 years with a win here. But they've got their sights on even bigger stuff than that. But this is a great home opportunity for Illinois.
No question about it. And another test for Michigan as they go on the road. Let's go with some midseason awards here in the Big Ten. I know you're not a huge early award guy, but we're at the midway point of the year. We're literally midway through our season, particularly 7 games in, 7 games to go. And so when we just look through the next couple categories here, we'll start with offensive player of the midseason so far. There's a lot to choose from at a lot of different positions, but if you had to choose 1 or 2 or even 3, who are you going with?
Yeah, I think right now offensively, I would probably go with Dylan Gabriel. I think Caleb Johnson would be a close second, but I think the fact that Dylan Gabriel, their team is undefeated. He is, he's replacing a guy who had an all-world year last year in Bo Nix. He's only been on campus, only been in Eugene for 8 months, has really become a leader of that team. And just the way he played in such a marquee matchup against Ohio State midway through the season, I would give him the nod as offensive player.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that, especially with the way he played on Saturday. All right, defensive player of the midseason. Who you got?
Yeah, defense. it would kind of be a toss-up a little bit, I think, between Jay Higgins and Aiden Fisher, but I'm going to give it to Aiden Fisher because of the way the Hoosiers have played. Everybody talks about their offense, but their defense has been outstanding as well, and he's one of a number of those guys who transferred over from James Madison, was a good player for Cignetti there, and he's a really good player for him in the Big Ten right now. So I'm giving it to Aiden Fisher at the halfway point.
He's the one who told us, we've heard all the noise that this is just JMU West. This is not just JMU West, which also is hurting my brain that it's that further west, quote unquote. Either way, all right, coach of the midseason so far would be who?
Yeah, it's got to be Curt Cignetti. There's been some really good coaching jobs so far. You got two undefeated guys in Dan Lanning and James Franklin. Their teams are playing really well. Matt Rule's doing a great job at Nebraska. Brett Bielema is doing a great job at Illinois. But Curt Cignetti, to me, at this point in the season, now they've got some tough tests left on their plate, right? Starting with this week against Nebraska. But to this point, I think he's done a phenomenal job.
I mean, if you don't believe it, then you know what you can do.
Google it.
That's right. Yes.
And of course, Craig Van Meter, we'd have to vote for Curt Cignetti now because of Craig Van Meter does so much for us as our production manager and a diehard Hoosier fan. And this is as good as it gets right now for Hoosier people. So
we've seen it each week. I get into our bus and he is watching the game and he's got his candy stripe pants on, ready to go. So I get it 100%. And Bloomington is great. I'm excited that they've got some extra excitement on top of what the basketball program brings each year.
Yeah.
And then last, I would imagine, is going to actually give us the same answer, but surprise team of the midseason.
Yeah, it's hard to not say Indiana, right? Because they're undefeated and they're sitting there, they're ranked, they're hosting, a huge game this weekend. But I would also throw Illinois in there as well, because I think, they're coming off a season where they were down a year ago. Luke Altmaier's playing at a completely different level than he did last year. And so I think Brett's done a great job with that team this year. Again, their only loss was to the number 3 team in the country at Penn State, So I think that's been a bit of a surprise as well. And they're playing really good football.
Especially with the way that Altmaier has played this year.
Yeah.
Just from what we saw last season. Now, he had a little bit of a bump up in his production towards the end before he got hurt and started protecting the football. But he has played like a completely different guy so far this year and has guided them to a 5-1 start. All right, our Xfinity big connections for today. And it's basically us. We're the big connections for today.
We are.
We called our game last year, the same matchup, Iowa and Michigan State. That was in Iowa City week 5 last year. And it actually was a really fun game. It looked like it was going to be the Spartans who would pull out a win. They were up in front kind of late in that game, last couple minutes, about 4 minutes remaining. And Cooper DeJean returned a 70-yard punt to the house. And it was awesome in there with about 4 minutes left. And then Iowa's defense came up with another stop. They got another score, and that was all she wrote, 26-16 at Kinnick. It was electric in there. Iowa's defense forced 4 turnovers, but it was a closely contested game between these two teams. Obviously, one side is a lot more different than what they were a year ago. But remember, that was the exact game that Cade McNamara went down with the injury that had him sidelined for the rest of the year. So for him, it's against the team that he did it against a year ago. And for Iowa, it's another chance to collect another win. For Michigan State, it's a chance to prove that under Jonathan Smith, this is a new era in Spartan football.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. One of the keys of that game, closely contested all the way down to the end. But at the end of the day, Iowa's defense forced 4 turnovers, and they had the big punt return. But the turnovers have been the problem for Michigan State this year. They were the problem last year. And so they've got to play clean, right? They'll have the home crowd. I think there'll be a good crowd there for the game. They're coming off the bye week, so they should be fully rested and as healthy as they've been since the start of the season. And if they take care of the ball, I think they've actually done some good things. Even though they lost 3 games in a row, you say, okay, well, Oregon and Ohio State are great. They also lost on the road to BC, or they lost to BC at home. And that's, that was a tough loss for them as well. But I'm anxious to watch Aiden Childs. I like Jonathan Smith a lot. I think he's a heck of a football coach, did a great job at Oregon State, and curious to see how they look coming off the bye week. But Iowa's Iowa. You know what you're going to get, right? I mean, they have been one of the most consistent teams in all of college football for a long, long time because of Kirk Ferentz. I mean, they have their same identity. They know exactly who they are. They know exactly what their formula is to win football games, and they play to it. And when you play Iowa, I don't care if you're Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan State, doesn't matter. When you play them, you have to beat them. You have to earn the victory because they are not going to beat themselves.
No, there's no surprises. Let's put it that way. You're not going to show up and you're going to go, what's this formation?
Right.
Wait, trick play? What? No. It's not going to happen when you've got Iowa on the other side. So a fun one. All-time series, Iowa leads 25-22 and 2. They've won the last two matchups as well. Michigan State did win the last time they played in East Lansing. That was 17-10 in 2017. As we go to our fan-submitted questions presented by Xfinity, our Xfinity third chair. And the first one is an interesting one, and I kind of already think I know the answer, but I'll pose it to you anyway. Should Oregon have moved up to number 1 after their win over Ohio State this week?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that where they are is probably right. I think that, I don't know that there is a dominant team in college football right now. I think all the really good teams all still have some areas of question or whatever. When the season started, people were saying Georgia and Ohio State seem to be like a cut above everybody else. Well, they're not, they aren't. And so right now, Texas, to me, maybe looks the most complete. And we'll find out a little bit more about them this week when they host Georgia. So I think where Oregon is right where they should be at this point.
Yeah, listen, Texas has had some quote-unquote tests so far. They went to Michigan early in the season, just had the Red River in which they dominated, but this is going to be a different level where you've got a top 5 team and you've got to see if you can make it happen. So we'll see what happens after this week, but I'm with you. Texas has done a little too much to really make it a legitimate argument that Oregon after that. If Oregon had dominated that game, maybe it's a different discussion, but it was a narrow victory. It's why Ohio State's only dropped down to 4 instead of dropping out of the top 5 entirely. Second question, and I am interested in your answer because I kind of have my thoughts on this, but what's holding USC back?
Well, we haven't had them, right? So I haven't studied them. I don't know. It just seems like inconsistency, because at times they've looked really good. They looked really good against LSU in the opener. Now they're sitting at 3-3, and LSU hasn't lost a game since then, right? They look good, and when they dismantled Wisconsin, particularly in the second half, and we've seen what Wisconsin has done the last couple of weeks. So I don't know that I have any particular answer. I thought their defense was playing a lot better this season than what I've seen, but then in the second half this week, they didn't, so, and then even in this game this past week, they give up the lead. They can't keep the lead. They miss a field goal in overtime, which allowed Penn State to win with a kick. So it just a lack of consistency, I think, because I think the talent is there, but they just haven't clicked and been consistent enough to win in some big games.
The way that, and that's exactly it. The way I see it is, you look at their 3 losses this year. They were up in the fourth quarter against Michigan. They were very tight all the way against Minnesota on the road. And they were up a couple scores early and in the fourth quarter against Penn State. They were in position to win all 3 games. So this is not like it's a massive fix that needs to happen. It's not like there's gaping holes in this roster. To your point, the talent is there. It just feels like they almost need to learn how to win. And there is an intangible skill that comes with that. And it's a group that, I think the one thing we see with USC these last 3 years under Lincoln Riley, there's a lot of turnover on both sides of the ball. And certainly now with a newer quarterback, I know Miller Moss has been there, but he wasn't the starter last year. And I mean, we see it even with Drew Aller. Do you think Drew Aller converts both 4th downs a year ago in his first year as the starter? Obviously, we don't know for sure, but my betting answer would be no. I think there is something with that experience. And so you almost have to go through these tough losses, these tight losses, to learn how to win these tight games. You mentioned the same thing with Ohio State and having not been in that type of environment. And sure enough, Oregon prevails on Saturday.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a really good point. And there's a real fine line in football, whether you're talking about college football, pro football, whatever. But there's a very fine line between hoping to win and expecting to win. Yeah. And when you get in those kind of games in the fourth quarter, when you have to make a third down throw, a fourth down conversion, those things, it shows up the group or the team or the individuals that have an expectation of making that play, an expectation of winning. And you're not just hoping to win or trying not to lose, and there's a big difference in that. And it shows up in a lot of different ways. And in those critical areas, critical downs, critical parts of the field, critical kicks, all those kind of things, is where that shows up.
Season far from over for them. They've got a lot of time to make up some ground, and we'll see how they do that. You can submit your questions to the show every week by using the hashtag Big Talk. And now, just before we get out of here, my favorite update each week, and I hear it's a big one this week, the Knights Guard update. Let us hear it.
Yeah, Knights Guard had a great outing, beat Cannon 38-6. It was 14-6 at halftime, and then we just rolled in the second half. And they had a really good back, probably the best player in the league, and our guys really were fired up to play. It kind of reminded me of our Penn State defense in back-to-back bowl games, going against Marcus Allen, who won the Heisman Trophy in 81, and Herschel Walker in 82. There was a little extra incentive going against the Heisman Trophy winners, and Luke Kuechly's defense came ready to play against Cannon, and so we got the big win. So we have 2 more games left. We have a game on Thursday of this week, and then we finish up next Tuesday. So we lost that first game, and we've won 5 in a row, and I actually am not going to, won't be there for the game Thursday, but I have a feeling our guys are going to play really well. So we play the game we lost. Our first game was to Holy Trinity's 8th grade team. Well, we play Holy Trinity's 7th grade team on Thursday. It's a bigger school, so they have enough guys for a whole 8th grade team and a whole 7th grade team. And we get a chance to avenge our first loss against the younger team on Thursday. So it will not be pretty, I don't think.
All I know is Big Talk episode 9 is going to have some fireworks.
Yeah, that's right.
I love it. All right. Well, best of luck this week to the Knights, and we will check you again next week. We appreciate you for tuning in to Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity. Make sure to download, subscribe on the NBC Sports YouTube channel, wherever you get your audio podcasts, and enjoy this week in college football.